Okay, so I started recording this immediately after I finished the last video, so yeah, I think I'm going to lose my mind thinking about the Void Century. Seriously, ever since God Valley showed up again, I've been doing nothing but theorizing, and with Vegapunk now 6 minutes away from spilling all the tea he has, it's honestly taken every ounce of willpower I've got in my body to not just skip ahead to read the juicy details. The main thing that's stopping me, honestly, from doing so is the fear that something is going to go horribly wrong to stop this message from ever really getting out. And if that happens, I will be exceptionally angry, but fret not, I have also included in this video a theory for how I think the God Valley incident potentially changes everything we think we know about One Piece. So, let's dive in. Alright, so the very first thing I thought when I saw that sweet double-page spread of those Elder Shadow Monster effects was, holy shit. And the second thing I thought was a question. I wondered what the sailors and wider navy were thinking when they witnessed these very obviously evil monsters showing up to fight on their side.
Are we the baddies?
I find it hilarious that literal evil shadow monsters appear from thin air on their side and no one is thinking, they look evil beyond reason. But from the outset, what I love most about the dynamics of this island-spanning battle is the clear narrative focus. When Zoro faces off against Lucci, our concern isn't whether Zoro can win, because, I mean, let's face it, he absolutely can, and does in spectacular fashion, by the way. Instead, the tension arises from the core directive that defines the climax for the Straw Hats: escape. Despite Egghead being surrounded by countless Navy ships, personnel, giants, and literal shadow goo monster fecks, seriously, what the hell is the Navy thinking? Oda has masterfully positioned this not as a battle worth fighting, but as one worth fleeing. Jinbei rushes desperately to Zoro, not to save him, but simply to ensure he doesn't miss the boat, which underscores this beautifully. And so the stakes here aren't really about strength, they're about the fragility and urgency of their getaway. And speaking of Lucci, I've got to toss my hat into the ring here. Surely he's gearing up for a redemption arc, right? After being utterly disrespected by the elders, forced into begging, only to be dismissed as a mere insect, it's impossible not to empathize. If Lucci was aiming for a Vegeta on Namek redemption story arc of some sort, he is right on track. Yet in classic One Piece style, even amidst this comedic chaos and exaggerated action, deeper thematic layers surface. Lucci has always been the one issuing orders to the bird on his shoulder, but here, the dynamics have shifted. They've flipped, underscoring just how much the mighty here have fallen. But as entertaining as Lucci's humiliation and potential redemption arc are, this segment quickly escalates beyond individual struggles. The return of giants Brogy and Dory, whom Luffy casually mentions he hasn't seen in 2 years, that rubbed me about as smoothly as sandpaper, forcing me to quickly glance at my calendar, realize that Little Garden actually aired a quarter century ago, and then subsequently I crumbled into dust like the ancient sarcophagus I've apparently become. Yet, amid all this chaotic nostalgia, something genuinely incredible occurs. The ancient guardian awakens. Now, believe me, I've got a lot to say about him in just a second, so hold tight. But fundamentally, this climax functions as a gripping escape narrative, underscored by the drama of injury or weakened characters like Robin and Vegapunk, who are unable to contribute as actively as usual. The sacrifices made by Stussy and Edison willingly staying behind to ensure everyone else's safety resonated strongly with me, even though we really didn't get a chance to know these characters all too well. Despite this, their actions echo the fundamental ethos of the series, highlighting that heroism often emerges quietly through understated acts of bravery. However, fuck all that shit, push that to the side, because at its core, this entire segment, it revolves around a singular, powerful theme: truth. Vegapunk's frantic transmission about earthquakes and rising sea tides aren't mere exposition, they are dire warnings layered with philosophical gravitas. His revelation about the Mother Flame and his chilling declaration that the world as we know it will sink into the sea crystallizes the narrative's urgency. Intriguingly though, my strongest theory about this story's potential conclusion didn't emerge directly from Vegapunk's explicit warnings, but rather the chapters where his transmissions were interrupted. Interestingly, this cut-in transmission occurs during his discussion of the will of deed, ironically resulting in an incredible speech complete with its own void segments. This narrative vacuum, however, encouraged me to consider a fascinating theory I have. What if the events depicted during those missing chapters were themselves a metaphorical representation of Vegapunk's lost message? Could Bonnie's transformation into Nika, which was fucking awesome, could that, which was catalyzed by witnessing Luffy's Gear 5, hold the key to understanding the elusive will of D? You see, Vegapunk's final line before the abrupt interruption read as follows: "Lastly, I have one final message to impart. To those scattered throughout the world who bear the name of D, within you there is a..." and then it ends. While it remains uncertain precisely what he intended to say, I propose the continuation might have been along the lines of, "Within you there is a wish, a legacy of love, courage, and the unwavering refusal to yield to tyranny." Bonnie's moment of profound transformation into her version of Nika was more than just a striking action sequence, it symbolized something deeply meaningful. Bonnie isn't a predestined figure like Luffy is. In fact, you could say despite her lineage, she's largely representative of the common person, someone who fights simply because she believes in freedom and justice, inspired by the love and sacrifice of her father, and now, subsequently, Luffy. It is precisely this idea, ordinary individuals inspired by extraordinary love and determination, that speaks volumes about the will of D, which made me wonder, perhaps what makes someone with the will of D special isn't a unique power, an exceptional lineage, or predestined fate. Perhaps it's something far more human and universally accessible, the simple yet profound act of believing in freedom, standing against oppression, and striving for happiness. In other words, the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Like Bonnie, Kuma's heroism wasn't predestined or inherent. It was a consistent choice he made out of love. Kuma wasn't remarkable because he was unique, he was remarkable because of the humanity, compassion, and resilience everyone around him had the capacity to embody. A sentiment that all life is precious and has inherent value. Conversely, the elders and Emu have zero regard for anyone other than the celestial dragons and themselves, openly referring to humanity in all forms as mere insects. This is fitting because as one of the main antagonistic forces within this story, they position themselves through this mindset as the direct antithesis to the will of D. So how do you fight an organization obsessed and defined by lineage? Simple. With traits that aren't biologically passed down but inherent to every living being. The greatest treasure Kuma gave to Bonnie wasn't strength or power, but his unwavering love and the hope-filled stories of liberation embodied by Nika. This profound familial love and hope are exactly what the will of D encapsulates. Consider what the world government did to Roger. They deliberately altered his name from Gold D Roger to Gold Roger. By stripping away the D, they sought to erase what he stood for. As Vegapunk aptly stated, history is told by the winners, but the world government made one crucial mistake.
人はいつ死ぬと思う。心臓をピストルで撃ち抜かれた時、違う。不治の病に侵された時、違う。猛毒キノコのスープを飲んだ時、違う。人に忘れられた時さ。
Vegapunk's missing transmission, I think, potentially encapsulates precisely this ideal. For so long, we've been trying to figure out how those who bear the will of D are connected. Their lineage, their jobs, their goals. But if you look in those places, you'll soon realize that the bearers of the will of D exist across pirate society, the Revolutionary Army, and even the Navy. They have been homeless orphans as well as royal figures. It is clear that this will, whatever it is, transcends one's circumstance or alignment, highlighting its universal and deeply human quality. The world government fears the D because it represents the potential within every person to rise against oppression. It symbolizes a collective, inherited dream, a dream of freedom, happiness, and dignity. Vegapunk's overarching message was cut off, but in the moments of silence that preceded it, Bonnie's actions spoke for him through a symbolic transformation. The missing segment from Vegapunk's transmission thus might have been a direct reflection of this metaphor, that the will of D is a wish passed through generations, a legacy of love and resistance against despair, proving that heroism and the power to inspire change can arise from anywhere, from anyone, who dare dream and resist. The beauty of One Piece is not found in predestined heroes and ancient prophecies, but in the simple yet profound idea that everyone can be a hero. Anyone can resist tyranny, anyone can fight for freedom, and anyone can carry forward the hope-filled legacy of the Will of D. As Luffy, and now Bonnie has shown us, sometimes the greatest of heroes arise from the most unlikely places, driven by the simplest yet most powerful motivations: love, freedom, and hope. Throughout One Piece, Oda has continually demonstrated a mastery of weaving subtle yet significant story threads into a grand tapestry. Among the most intriguing of these threads concerns Roronoa Zoro and his cursed sword, Kitetsu 3. Now, I have a friend called Rachel, and she recently walked me through a fascinating idea concerning the cursed swords known as Kitetsu, and it's honestly too cool not to share. You see, the first time we encounter the concept of cursed swords is in Logue Town, where Zoro stumbles across Kitetsu 3. Tashigi identifies it, explaining that famous swordsmen who've wielded Kitetsu blades typically suffer tragic deaths due to their supposed curse. But in a dramatic test of fate, Zoro tosses Kitetsu 3 into the air, challenging its curse against his own indomitable will. The sword narrowly misses his arm, affirming Zoro's unyielding resolve. It's a fantastic character moment and sets the stage for Zoro's intricate relationship with his blades. But here's where it gets interesting, right? You see, each Kitetsu sword has a distinctive hilt, recognizable by its cross and clover-like design. Fans immediately drew a connection to one of the mysterious elders in this regard, specifically the horse-like elder, whose sword hilt bore an uncanny resemblance. At first, this seemed speculative. However, as the story progressed onto Wano, the thread thickened. Here, Luffy casually picked up another Kitetsu sword, specifically Kitetsu 2, from the home of Tengu, later revealed to be Oden's father. And once again, this sword was described as intensely cursed, reinforcing the legacy and significance of these blades within the narrative. And now fast forward again to Egghead, where Zoro clashes directly with this horse elder wielding what fans speculate to be Kitetsu. I mean, there's visual and narrative cues strongly suggesting that it is anyway. Could this imply that Zoro, the three-sword wielder, might eventually claim all three Kitetsu swords? You might think so, but maybe not. Perhaps the narrative intends Zoro to surpass these legendary older blades with his relatively newer Kitetsu 3, symbolizing the new generation surpassing the old, much like the thematic weight of Luffy's iconic straw hat having been passed down to him. This resonates, I think, deeply with Oda's overarching message that legacy isn't merely inherited but actively created and surpassed by those who follow. Older swords in One Piece are powerful precisely because they've absorbed generations of will and experience. Thus, Zoro retaining Kitetsu 3 could represent a thematic shift in this regard, a powerful statement about the new generation creating its own legacy, standing up to and clashing with the old guard. And speaking of old guard, why don't we talk about that giant guardian thing, eh? The Guardian's existence has intrigued every character who studied it. Its history and past battles raise countless questions, and its importance to this tale genuinely cannot be overstated. And when I say important, I don't just mean to this arc alone, I'm talking about the entire narrative tapestry of One Piece itself. Oda has repeatedly shown a profound mastery of flashbacks. Right? Throughout this sprawling epic, we've seen how effectively a different perspective can recontextualize and expand a story we thought we already knew. And as is often the case, an arc's emotional and narrative resonance hinges on these very flashbacks. Kuma's backstory was undeniably Egghead's emotional centerpiece, and I've praised it endlessly for its sheer brilliance. However, there was another, more subtle moment that stood out to me. A moment hinting at perhaps the most pivotal flashback yet to be revealed. In the heart of chapter 1122, when all hope seems lost, and it appears the Straw Hats might succumb to the relentless onslaught of shadowy monstrosities, a voice only Luffy could hear suddenly pierces through the chaos and says, "Sorry, Joy Boy. I wanted to apologize. Deep down, I knew that you couldn't still be alive, but you look so much like him that it brings back the warm feelings I had that day. I'm sorry, Joy Boy. Sorry that I couldn't make you king." Out of nowhere, reading this simple exchange and the rest of this chapter, I found myself welling up unexpectedly. Initially, as I read through this climax, I was gearing up for an exciting, thrilling escape. It's the finale after all. I had already been deeply moved by Kuma, and so at this point I believed all that remained was a grand resolution. But Egghead isn't just another arc, it is unquestionably the single greatest setup arc within perhaps the greatest story I've ever had the privilege to experience. Within the space of 17 pages in chapter 1122, Oda didn't just deliver thrills, he wove in an echo, an emotional resonance linking directly to what could become the foundational, inciting incident for the entire One Piece story, the untold adventure of Joy Boy and the Void Century. When the time is right, you'll save me. This special hockey, handed down from Joy Boy to Emmett, ultimately provides Luffy and his crew the means to escape an otherwise certain demise. Its significance goes beyond mere plot convenience or as a metric to gauge strength, though admittedly it did notably strain even Emu. That was cool. This hockey symbolizes something far deeper. At its core, hockey is simply will, a manifestation of determination, courage, and heart. Yet, in this moment, the prevailing emotion isn't just strength or heroism, but profound melancholy. Emmett's apology to Joy Boy reveals a lingering sorrow and a deep regret for dreams left unfulfilled. Notably, Joy Boy is described as the first pirate, but never as the greatest pirate. His defeat, marking the end of the Void Century, was the definitive turning point of history, affecting everything that followed for the next 800 years. However, this poignant apology from Emmett isn't the first apology associated with Joy Boy either. On Fishman Island, Robin discovered a poneglyph, uniquely styled like a letter, one that she describes as potentially serving as an apology, one perhaps directed at Joy Boy. The broader point I'm driving at here is that Joy Boy's story is ultimately one of optimistic resilience yet profound tragedy. His failure ushered in centuries of tyranny. Whatever occurred during the Void Century, the world government emerged believing that they had won decisively. But as the narrative has revealed, that victory was far from complete. As Emmett notes, Luffy strikingly resembles Joy Boy. We've previously discussed how objects like swords inherited the will of their wielders, growing stronger as generations pass. And so here too, the symbolism remains powerful. In Joy Boy's flashback, as he entrusts his contingency hockey to Emmett, a familiar straw hat is donned atop his head. And so you're telling me, 8 centuries later, that same hockey, imbued with enduring determination, becomes instrumental in saving Luffy, the man now wearing his hat, prolonging his journey and keeping Joy Boy's dream alive. That's insane. That can't be a coincidence. Joy Boy's story is fundamentally the opposite side of Luffy's coin. A hero with dreams, optimism, and dear friends whose ambition tragically remained unrealized. But Joy Boy never allowed those failures to define him. His hopeful spirit shines through clearly in this exchange with Emmett. Symbolically, the hockey Emmett unleashes in this crucial moment represents the purest monument to the will of D, perhaps that I'd ever encountered. Across centuries, Joy Boy's undying will and dream provided precisely what Luffy and his friends needed in their darkest hour. In the end, Joy Boy's tale isn't defined by his failure, but by his unyielding optimism. The very essence of the will of D, his legacy is a profound reminder that greatness isn't exclusive to those chosen by destiny. Instead, it resides in the courageous choices made by ordinary people who dare to resist despair, oppression, and injustice. The heartfelt echoes of Joy Boy's hope, carried forward by Emmett and finally realized by Luffy, underscored the beautiful core message of One Piece. Everyone possesses the capacity to become a hero, to change the world. And in those defining moments, when all seems lost, it's precisely this ordinary yet extraordinary spirit that lights the path forward. And this is where I would end my video had it not been for one stray plot thread that appeared and subsequently vanished all within the span of a single chapter: Perona and her attempted rescue of her master, Gecko Moria. This has genuinely been gnawing at me ever since the arc ended. Why mention Moria at all? We've got threads that seem satisfyingly interconnected. You know, we've got Coby, Sabo, Luffy, Blackbeard, Shanks, but Moria? Where could he possibly fit into all this? Well, let's rewind for a second. During the events of Kuma's flashback concerning the God Valley incident, we're greeted by this striking group shot. All the usual suspects appear: Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, and so forth. But who are these guys? Suddenly given pride of place with dedicated panels of their own. Have we seen them? Well, turns out this isn't actually the first time we've seen these supposedly new faces. The first time, you might have guessed it, was none other than Moria's own island ship, Thriller Bark. But how could these infamous figures possibly be in Moria's possession, you might be asking? Well, consider this detail. Within the chapter, the Celestial Dragons announce the beginning of their annual manhunt. But in the upper right corner, we're told explicitly that the location of God Valley was the West Blue. Yet we also know that following the God Valley incident, the island itself disappeared completely, erased entirely from the maps. And that is true. God Valley isn't there anymore, but that doesn't mean the island itself is necessarily gone either. Remember, upon first sighting Thriller Bark, Nami explicitly states that her log pose isn't reacting to the floating island before them, leading to Brook casually responding with, well, of course not. The island came all the way here from the West Blue. Boom! Why are there so many bodies littering Thriller Bark? Perhaps because it was the site of the Celestial Dragon's notorious manhunt. Why were the corpses of those infamous pirates in Moria's possession? Perhaps because Thriller Bark is God Valley, or rather, what remains of it. The very place they all died. Moreover, during Kuma's flashback, we're given brief glimpses of his tragic past, including his time spent surrounded by celestial dragons, potentially in God Valley itself, and intriguingly, there's a fleeting shot of a castle. That castle seems to match nearly perfectly the castle from Thriller Bark. Sure, there are minor stylistic differences, but they easily fall within the scope of Oda's evolving art style over the years. And so, if you accept all of that, consider this. Imagine the devastating irony here with Kuma returning to Thriller Bark, otherwise known as God Valley, potentially decades later, still under the world government's control. Only this time he's tasked with retrieving Luffy's head from the very location where he himself was once marked a dead man. And what does he test Zoro with? Accepting pain. The exact act Kuma himself carried out selflessly for years on behalf of others. That was a lot of talking, reviewing, and theorizing, so to round out this now exceedingly long Egghead review, I'll share my overall thoughts. It's spectacular. Utterly spectacular. Eiichiro Oda somehow managed to naturally and efficiently lay the groundwork for what will no doubt be an endgame of legendary proportions. The only disappointing thing about this arc is that it manages to pull off this feat so effortlessly. I'm sure that the vast majority that watch it or read it will come away not fully appreciating just how incredible what they read just was. However, given the progression of the series, I will be taking this moment to pause my One Piece review series until the next section comes to completion. But if you are interested in more One Piece content from me that is covering the really recent material, I will be recording my initial reactions and impressions to each chapter following Egghead onto my shorts feed here on YouTube every week. But don't worry, I will also be making giant reviews for every subsequent One Piece arc that's released. These are just to tide people over in the interim. So, if you want to follow along, consider subscribing. Until then, I've been Totally Not Mark, and thank you all so much for watching.